Welcome to Utilizing Tech, the podcast about emerging technology from Gestalt IT. This season of Utilizing Tech focuses on edge computing, which demands a new approach to compute, storage, networking, and more. I'm your host, Stephen Foskett, organizer of Tech Field Day and publisher of Gestalt IT. Joining me today as my co-host is the fine Mr. Alastair Cooke. Thanks for joining me today, Al.
Thanks for inviting me, Steve. It's always a pleasure to catch up with you, and it seems like we're going to be doing a bit of a back to the future, finding that everything old is new again today.
I think that's true. Those of us who've grown up in IT and been here for a while are familiar with the proverb of the station wagon loaded with backup tapes, or the sneaker net, or the challenges of moving data, wouldn't you say?
Yes, I think we've all gotten sort of a differing experience over time, but it's always been that moving data is a problem, and as we solve the problem of moving a certain amount of data, then the amount of data that needs to be moved increases. And we've definitely seen over the last few years the expectation of the speed at which you can move things and you can respond has really increased. And so we're seeing some real challenges around moving around large amounts of data and enabling business agility through that.
And one area that there is a lot of data, of course, is media and entertainment. So we know that video production is increasingly, probably predominantly digital this time. And of course, we know how big these video files can be, whether it's the Utilizing Tech podcast series or watching videos on Netflix or the videos we're producing on our phones. There's a lot of data there. And a lot of that stuff is recorded on location all around the world. That's what we're going to be focusing on today. So one of the things that we haven't really discussed yet on Utilizing Tech is the world of media and entertainment, and that's our focus for today. So we have invited Jimmy Fusil, M&E expert and business development manager for Tsecond, to join us. Jimmy, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Stephen. Hi, Alastair. It's great to be here, and thank you for having me. Look forward to talking about all these problems that we have in the media entertainment industry.
Yeah, it's a cool industry.
Yeah, no, I've been working in this industry for 20 years, and data has, through that transition, like you were talking about, to digital. And as usual, as you said, you solve a problem and then that problem grows and you have to solve it again. So that's why I'm working at Tsecond. I think it's what they have is a potential solution to not just now, but the future of moving that data around for the media entertainment industry.
Yeah, it is an amazing industry. I've been to NAB show, for example, and seen the amazing sort of parallel universe of technology that they have. Like Alastair said, what's old is new again. There are all sorts of specialized devices and specialized approaches for this. But Jimmy, why don't you start by just talking a little bit, like, what does a modern production look like in the field?
Well, at the core of it is a camera, right? And a microphone, or several cameras and several microphones. And those cameras on a typical movie or TV set in the US create 3 to 5 terabytes of data every day. And you've had this cluster, this crew, right? These people who have come together for, let's say, 6 months to make this TV show. And they all bring their own preferred gear, their own preferred device. And they all try to share this data amongst them and then have to move this data to various processes, from transferring what the camera filmed into a smaller file that the editor can then edit, and then giving that same file that the camera shot and giving it to a visual effects or several visual effects companies to add some magic to it, and then finalizing the picture and the image, and then moving all that to be localized so that it can be distributed around the world in every language. It's a lot of data, and it's big data, very high resolution, very high quality. And it takes a lot of work just getting things where they need to be. That's the biggest thing. And the surprise is, while networking has brought great convenience to a lot of this, we're still, using, I don't know if anybody else uses this term. I'm in my little Hollywood corner over here, but sneakernet, is that still, that's still a thing for the media and entertainment industry?
I'm interested in how much of that is transferring from the site of recording and how much is transferring between different devices that are at the location where the recording's made, because uh, there's a whole different set of challenges around that speed of movement. Uh, is this about moving between the different favored devices at that edge location where the video is being produced, or is it about moving between the different contributors, or both of these things?
So there is data moving amongst devices on the set. So a compressed video is moving from the camera to a monitor that the director can watch and the producers can watch. That's being recorded in a playback system so that if the director wants to see something they shot 2 hours ago, they can pull it up. But that's a different set of data than the data that's being recorded into the camera that will be used for post production. There's all this metadata that's flying, and actually, it can be a challenge on movie sets to have the amount of bandwidth and to manage also the interference of all these different networks that are where with all these different devices communicating. And then if you get into more advanced production technologies, such as virtual production, where you're playing back video onto a super large LED system to act as a fake background, let's say. Now you've got a bunch of networked devices that are playing back and managing the LED system and also enabling correction to those images that are being projected. So you can have actually a whole set of networks on site of various devices communicating or interfering with each other on the set. But that's one challenge, and usually that is smaller data. The bigger challenge, as far as big data, right, is getting this video that's coming out of the cameras and getting it to its next phase, which is QA, syncing with audio, and creating files that the editor can then use to start editing the movie or the episode. So both things.
Some might say, is this really edge? But I think that it absolutely is. It definitely meets my definition because it is bandwidth constrained. It is availability constrained, meaning that you sometimes can have outages. It is also the province of people who are not IT people, which is another similarity with retail or industrial. In other words, these are people who are trying to get their job done, and they're not all that interested in why isn't the network working or how do I, optimize this. They just want their camera to work. And, so I think that it definitely is. And I think that this gives us a whole, like opens a window into a different world, but one that other areas can learn from. Because if we think about it, this kind of data is present in other areas as well. I mean, I don't want to get off topic, but I could see similar discussions in oil exploration. I could see similar discussions in industrial IoT, in manufacturing, in autonomous vehicles, basically anywhere that you've got sort of sensors out there in the real world, whether they're cameras or LiDAR, collecting lots of data that then needs to be moved around and coalesced. But let's focus on the M&E space. So, there's moving data from the on-site of production back to the studio. But as you talked about, there's also moving it to New Zealand so that Weta can look at it, right? And Alastair, and all these other production houses. I don't know if you've watched a movie recently, but in the ending credits, there's more than 2 units now, and there's a heck of a lot of production studios involved in these movies, right?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's movies have always been a collaborative process, right? Where many people come together to make a movie or a TV show. Um, and now that collaboration is global, across time zones and across data centers, and moving. Sometimes it's only 300 gigabytes of data to a, a production house or a VFX house in New Zealand, and sometimes it's terabytes of data that's been captured because volumetric capture of a set, for example, where that needs to be reproduced and digitized. So yeah, it has to be in many places. And like you said, you look at the credits, and it's not usually one or two companies working on these movies. It's tens to dozens, you know. So um, it's a lot of shuttling data around, and that's really happened over the last 20 years of digitization. First, you know, files started to matter because we were digital now instead of filming on actual film. And then the the practices became more complex. So a lot more files were created, different types of files. And then the files got bigger because the cameras now film at 8K, 6K, um, and have greater bit depth. So the files themselves become bigger. And now they have to be all over the place. And they have to be reliably mimicked in all these different places because the production itself, the set will travel, the post production team will travel, and the VFX are happening in all these different localities, whether it's Europe or India or New Zealand or Canada. So it's a big data movement and data custody problem.
I think that was one of the interesting challenges for this as an edge to me is that the location where you're actually operating is transient. That the on-site production, I mean, here in New Zealand, there is a famous tour of going to all of the places where they shot video for the various Lord of the Rings and Hobbit films in New Zealand, and they're all over the place. And Jimmy, I've got to expect that the production crews are expecting the same service no matter where they go now. That just because you're in the back of beyond on the top of some beautiful hill, you can't say, well, there's going to be a 3-day delay before you can see any of the results of what we've done today.
Exactly. Sometimes that processing has to happen on site. You have to drag along a miniature data center to take those files out of the camera and take that audio and do what you need to do so that it can be watched in what we call dailies or rushes the next day. You know, everybody used to sit in a theater and look at it together. Now everybody's looking at their laptop and usually looking at it from a cloud served service, right? So you're processing locally, uploading the results, and then watching it back locally via cloud service of some sort. And yes, network connectivity remains super important. And yes, sometimes it's not enough to move the data to where it needs to be processed. It needs to be processed on site. And that to me is also fitting the definition of edge for sure. And then we can look at, you know, what I actually think are these kind of mobile edge processing devices, which are, you know, broadcast trucks, right? Where you're going to an event, filming it, collecting all this data, and you're already starting to process it because you're already starting to edit it. The director's already picking their favorite angles, and they're already doing some color adjustments and such. And then, you know, that broadcast truck packs up and then moves to another event and moves to another place. I think of those as also, you know, really edge processing kind of systems as well.
And there's another aspect that you keep hitting on is that the actual data files, the original files shot by camera, are way too large to do any of the real-time fast processing on. So there is a sort of effectively sampling of that data to get a lower resolution, lower color depth version of the film that's used for these dailies for making, even being sent to the editors. And I think there's an interesting analog to when we're generating large amounts of sensor data, we may need to very rapidly summarize that data in order to be able to make real-time decisions. And that's essentially what's going on. We're getting a summary of the video data being put in front of humans who are making fast decisions. And that's definitely a pattern we see in a lot of the edge deployments. And it seems to have been built into the cameras to actually do this, as I understand, not something that's done after the capture of the video.
That's true. Certain cameras can create a proxy file and upload it right away. And that's, you know, there's this vision of camera to cloud. Uh, and it works. You know, you can see that file almost instantaneously once somebody says cut. And if there's plenty of bandwidth, you'll see that file somewhere else in the world. But the actual high definition, you know, high resolution, full color depth file, getting that up and into the cloud and processed, that's still something that's being worked on. And certainly there are productions that are doing that with a lot of resources, but it's still in its infancy for sure.
And I believe that you have a solution for that too. So I think
Well,
it would be fair to say, how do you do that?
well, yeah, thank you. I love talking about the problem. So that's thank you for reminding me to start talking about maybe some of the ways we can solve it. That's really what's interesting about the work being done at Tsecond with this Bryck device, which is really a way to get massive amounts of data from the collection point uh, into the cloud, or to process it locally, because it really is capable of both. So I'll describe it a little bit. It's a brick, right? It's 9.5 by 4 by 4 inches, and it's a device that's basically an NVMe storage device that can hold up to a petabyte in certain configurations, like in that block, right? And it connects to a server via this tray with proprietary connectors, and the tray right now is rack mounted, and you can get 40 gigabytes per second on and off of it. 40 gigabytes. I always have to remind myself to say bytes and not bits. And so I like to think of it both ways. Where we talked a little bit about SneakerNet earlier. In some ways, it's a way to SneakerNet a whole bunch of data very quickly, because it can ingest data very quickly through that connection, and then it can move very securely because it's very rugged. It's There's proprietary process of bonding all these drives together so that you can drop it, you can leave it in water for a few months, you can take it back out, it still works. So very rugged form factor, and you can travel with that securely because it's very tamper proof. And so you can move this high value data in that way very quickly, because sometimes it is still faster to walk or drive or fly with it than it is to put it through the network. But the other thing that's really interesting about it is that you can, with that kind of performance on and off the drive in that portable factor, you can really build it's almost like a mini data center. You add some compute to it, you add some workstations around it. People can, like I said, collaboration is key in making a movie or a TV show. So you can point a whole bunch of people to that data, and they can work in this highly collaborative way locally, right? And in that way, I think of it like, we talked about, like as an edge device in many ways, because it enables you to do that high processing work locally before you take the data somewhere else.
So, from a technical perspective, essentially, it's like a giant thumb drive, except much, much, much better in every way. But I think in terms of sort of conceptually understanding it, I imagine that audio, video production engineers, and so on, they look at it probably like the removable media that cameras use. And I don't know if people are aware, but yeah, a lot of cameras have adopted or the same sort of removable media that your own camera might use, except they use different formats. Some of them use SSDs, like regular SATA SSD. Some of them use much more advanced stuff, but at least they conceptually can understand this brick right here is like a piece of media that my camera can write to, and I can use it that way. Is that how they approach it, or is it approached as sort of a different animal entirely than removable media?
It's approached in some ways in that way. Like we did a proof of concept with a camera manufacturer where we pointed 20 cameras, 10 cameras. We could have done 20, but we only could get 10, and recorded simultaneously like it was a common, SSD for all these cameras. And they were filming at 8K and 60 frames per second. So you can imagine the amount of data coming off of each of these cameras. So that's a way of thinking it that is analogous to what you're talking about, Stephen, which is, let's look at it as portable storage, right? But there's companies that are very, very impressed by the performance in that small package. The fact that you can get 40 gigabytes a second off of off of this brick through this tray and the whole system really enables them to parallelize a lot of processes that in the past, when you pull that card out of the camera and then you put it into the card reader connects via USB, or if you're lucky, Thunderbolt, and you get those files off of there and onto another piece of storage that then has to, from which you do all the other processing you need to do. So there's opportunities both in capturing directly to the brick, and there's opportunities also in processing directly from the brick and taking all these steps out, which, it's copying data. So in some ways it's very simple. In other ways it can be very scary, because this is where things go wrong. This is where, the drive gets misplaced, or the truck rolls over it, or, more than anything, there's corruption, or because you're not in a great environment for computing. You're going into a place that's either too hot or too dusty, or all those things. And so minimizing those errors is actually, and minimizing also the time between the camera, stopping record and getting access to those files is a big thing for productions these days, for sure.
And I'm sure there's a security angle on there as well, because if you're making the latest Marvel blockbuster, there's a lot of fans who would be very keen to see some of that content long before the studios are ready for it to be released. Is there, you talked about the robustness and the tamper-proof nature. Are there also security capabilities built into the product?
Well, there's definitely some integrity, data integrity software that really looks for a bit flip and corrects it constantly. So that data integrity piece, but I think from a data security perspective, is a bit more what you're talking about, is just that the fact that it's a proprietary connector that you need this tray to connect to, you can really it makes it very difficult for people to access this data. You have to figure out, you would have to own a tray basically, and a server, and therefore you would have to be, in some ways, a customer of Tsecond to be able to access this data. So I think that's, you can't pull it apart either, just physically. Like you pull it apart, you destroy it, right? So that makes it very secure. And I will say that, like you point to, Alastair, like the industry is very, very, very sensitive to data security, because a leak means that the surprise is gone. A leak means that the creative privacy of that director and the actors working together to make something is violated. So it's taken a while for this industry to even warm up to the cloud. We've been banking there much longer than we've been making movies there. And there's still, I think, this remaining feeling of safety and security in having something that's physically hardened as well, which is very familiar to this industry.
So we're used to the idea of server huggers from the virtualization days, and now we have, I guess it would originally have been tape huggers, but the movement away from tape and towards much more non-linear media has made a big difference. But yeah, holding on to the physical media seems to still be a big cultural piece there.
Yeah, with since you bring up tape, I think tape is an interesting a medium, because it is still a very dominant format. And I'm not talking about videotape. I'm also talking about LTO, archival tape. It's a big part of how the M&E industry in the production phases, the M&E industry in the production phases leverages tape to archive, but also to create backups. There's a real desire to have multiple copies of the footage as soon as possible, so that if something happens in one location, one copy of the footage, there's a backup somewhere, there's a data integrity somewhere. And this industry has gotten very good at writing tape very quickly, but then accessing that data becomes a very big problem. And so I think in some ways, we're getting to the density of tape and even higher density, but we're also, with the Bryck, with T-Second's Bryck, we're getting to a point also where you have that density and that security, but you also have that performance, which has been missing from tape in some ways. And it's maybe because M&E is so reliant on physical media, like you said, but that's a level of security that I think the industry is attached to.
And of course, the multiple copies is a learnt lesson from, I think it was one of the Toy Story movies where an administrative error and the data center destroyed the only recording. And the only way the movie actually got produced was that somebody was on maternity leave and had a backup on their own, or a copy on their own workstation. So, yeah, definitely a learnt lesson that could have been a very expensive mistake. I think the different media to solve different sort of problems. So using things like tape as long-term archive, where the cost of retention, the cost of storage is the most important thing versus the speed of access. I think there's probably also a piece around the retrievability of the individual parts. I've heard some discussions around making new video. You'll often use segments out of a previous video that may have been produced 10 years ago, and the retrievability of the individual segments is really important. And I think that's where nonlinear media like the Bryck becomes much more usable than tape media.
Yeah, it is. It is hard to exercise those archives. It is hard to exercise a tape archive sometimes because you are looking for. You can't really scrub through it, right? You have to restore a whole bunch of things, and then hopefully you're very organized. But I also think that tape has its place in the sense, but using it as a transfer medium, I think, which is what we've sometimes seen in this industry around post production, just because of its ruggedness and its security, that really to me is something that it's not always super well adapted to. Yeah.
Yeah, I imagine too that some of these folks, your tape huggers, might be really wanting to have a copy on tape as well as on the Bryck.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I imagine if it's attached to a server, I imagine that's possible, right? I mean, you can basically coalesce everything on the Bryck and then dump it to tape before you give it to the production assistant to fly across the ocean with, right?
Yeah, I think actually that brings up another proof of concept we did with a post production company, and we'll have a white paper coming out on that in the coming month, where the process there is they receive the cards or the footage from the camera and they copy it to their system, and that starts a chain of processes which includes syncing audio, adjusting color, framing, and creating the dailies, but also archiving. And in the past, because of the limitations of the performance of their storage, they had to work through these things linearly. So you ingest the data, you validate it, do a hash check on it, and then you move it to syncing, and then you color it, and then you create the deliverables, and then you start the archive. Well, in this case with the Bryck, when they put it in, they realized, oh, we can start archiving right away. Once we do the validation, we start archiving, and there is it's nice to be done archiving earlier, but also there is this feeling that, okay, now we already are starting to make the backup copies. So if something disastrous happens, we know we've already started that process, right? And that I think is goes to the point that this performance on this storage is also very necessary because you need to do a whole bunch of things all at once with this data right away.
Yeah, and also, we talked about SneakerNet. Another colorful IT term is shoe shining. That you have to keep tapes streaming if you want to get the performance, because tapes actually do have quite a lot of bandwidth, but only when you're really pouring the data in there and when they can get the data and they don't have to stop and start and reset.
Mm-hmm.
So I imagine that having a nice high performance source for that data is important as well, to make sure that you can actually make use of tape media. So, I mean, the whole production process sounds it's really amazing. It's really interesting to learn about how these things happen. I guess kind of in conclusion, in summary, Jimmy, what's your message to the edge about this technology, whether they're in the media and entertainment space or not?
Well, I think, the most precious moment in media and entertainment is that collection moment, right? You need to collect that data and then you need to hold on to it and get it to the places where it needs to go as quickly as possible. And um, to me, that's kind of true of that's kind of what the paradigm of edge is telling us is like really important things are happening right there, right? And they need those processes need to be serviced, and then that data becomes incredibly precious. And so I think the message is like, find a way to get it as quickly as possible. Find a way to make it safe, and then find a way to get it out of there and to the place that it needs to be. And I feel like, sometimes that's going to be a network, but sometimes it might not be because that location might be a jungle, or it might be a desert, or it might be a poorly serviced warehouse somewhere downtown. And you just need to get that data where it needs to go and make sure it gets there safely. So maybe let's think. It's almost like network is now the box, and I think there's no there's other ways. Maybe it's time to think about sneakernet sometimes again, if it makes sense.
Jimmy, I think I've learned something really significant from you, and is that my expectation that edge locations are about refining data and getting the most value out of the data by making it less doesn't actually match every use case. Here, clearly, the high resolution, finest granularity, biggest volume data is the most valuable thing that you're producing. The summarization and the smaller units of data, the rushes, dailies, the lower resolution versions being sent to editors, those are all less valuable than the full volume data. So again, it just shows the variety of challenges that organizations face with different use cases out at the edge.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think we're seeing that the collection of data and the maintaining that high quality data is becoming important in new ways as well in the entertainment industry. Listen, there's now even more interest than there's ever been before in 360 video and 180 video and immersive, what we can put under an umbrella of, let's say, immersive video, right? And a lot of that is captured from multiple cameras or giant cameras that have even more resolution. And you're right that sometimes you want to refine that data right away, but really in the media and entertainment industry, in the production mindset, you're trying to collect as many options for yourself as possible that you may utilize later. You want that flexibility. And so you don't want to let go of anything. You might process things so that you can look at it, so you can make decisions around whether it was a good take, or whether that is the right costume, or whether that was a great performance. But you want to hold on to all of it because it has value in ways that you may not realize yet. And that is, I think, maybe, I think that I'm kind of echoing what you're saying. So I think the data is about getting processed locally, but it's also about sometimes preserving all of it and all of its potential value that we may not realize it has yet.
Yeah, I think this has been really interesting because it's a unique, M&E is a unique environment. It's a unique edge environment, but it's also similar to others. And I think it's important for people to understand that there is technology that can be applied from one area to another. And that's sounds to me like what this is it's applying some pretty cool enterprise technology to a very, some remote jungle somewhere. And maybe this makes sense for other applications as well. So I urge our listeners to check out Tsecond. Jimmy, where can they do that? Where can they continue this conversation with you?
Well, they can find us at tsecond.us. That's TSECOND .us, and then they'll probably be seeing a white paper come out in the coming month around some of our work with the M&E industry, some application of Bryck there. And on the website, you'll also see, like you said, that there's plenty of other applications for this device that is already being used in many other domains. So if you're curious about it, that's the best place to go.
Alastair, what have you been up to in the last few weeks?
Well, I continue to slave away at my day job, but also organising the V Brown Bag Tech Talks at VMworld Explore. And I will be seeing you there, Stephen, in about, is it 3 weeks? It's getting awfully close.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing to think that it's getting that close. Yes, I'll see you at VMware Explore. I'm also going to be at Flash Memory Summit this week and at a number of other events, including Edge Field Day, which is coming up. If you're interested in learning more about that, go to techfieldday.com. So, as mentioned, you can find me on social media at sfoskett. I'm here every Monday with Utilizing Edge, part of the Utilizing Tech podcast series. You'll also see me on Tuesday in the On-Premise IT podcast and on Wednesday in the Gestalt IT News Rundown. If you enjoyed this discussion, please do subscribe. You'll find us in your favorite podcast applications or on YouTube. Please do give us a rating. Please give us a comment. We would love to hear from you. This podcast was brought to you by GestaltIT.com, your home for IT coverage from across the enterprise. For show notes and more episodes, go to our special dedicated website, utilizingtech.com, or find us on Twitter and Mastodon at utilizingtech. Thanks for joining, and we'll see you next week.